José is a very eminent scholar of Neoplatonism, certainly one of the most eminent in Latin America. He is professor of Greek at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre. And he specializes in Plato, Plotinus, and Neoplatonism. He's working on the Portuguese translation of the Enneads of Plotinus. And he's also recently published a reader, correct me if I'm wrong, Jose, on the theory of time in Neoplatonism. So we're very honored to have him with us today. And Junior, if you would like to go ahead with your presentation, which is entitled Intelligible and Integral Time in Late Platonism.
Okay, so I cannot avoid sparing a few minutes of my brief talk, my brief and modest, very modest talk, to thank you, the organizers, Michael Chase, Alexander Blum, and Katja Krause. I wish to thank Michael especially for his immense generosity towards scholars working outside North America and the main countries of Europe, like myself. It was hearing Michael that many years ago that I became I first became aware of Neoplatonic theories of time after Plotinus, and also of the work of our first speaker, Gideon Barbour, whose book, The End of Time, has been a favorite of mine since I knew it. Well, that said, I still have to explain the slight modification on the title and the content of my talk, from intelligible and integral time to the emergence of intelligible time in late Platonism. I intended to include Damascius' concept of integral time in my talk, as I did not know that Pantelis Golitsas was going to talk about Damascius too when I sent my abstract. Therefore, in order to avoid overlapping subjects, I formulated my talk a bit. Okay. So, well, at some point in the end of the third and the beginning of the 4th century after Christ, of course, there begins with the Syrian philosopher Iamblichus, this radically new, even counterintuitive conception of an intelligible time. That is a time that exists in itself and by itself, a time that does not depend on, does not derive from, and is not actually attached to our physical, sensible world, the realm of change. And even stranger, a time that is not in flux, a time that does not flow, but it's static and indivisible. This idea of time, introduced by Iamblichus, as I said, became more or less the standard conception of time in late Platonism, being held with some differences, of course, also by philosophers after Iamblichus, namely Proclus, Damascius, and Simplicius. However, even though radically new, this conception of time does not appear out of nowhere and for no reason, but rather it is construed within a broader conceptual framework, that of Platonism or Neoplatonism in late antiquity. And it is construed with certain given philosophical elements, and not less important, it as an answer to or solution to difficulties raised by previous thinkers. This being so, and having in mind that I was asked to talk to an audience of scientists, not historians of philosophy, who may not be acquainted with nor interest in the labyrinthine metaphysical systems of Iamblichus and Proclus, I found it appropriate to show how such a conception of intelligible time emerged from what came before it. And I believe this position may also be useful as a background for Pantelis Golitsas' talk. So the first and most important name in the history of our concept here is Plato, of course, as one may suspect. In the dialogue Timaeus, one of the fundamental writings of Plato for the Platonic tradition, Plato has the character time used to describe how our natural, sensible world has appeared. So Timaeus tells us the story in which an enigmatic supernatural maker, the craftsman of the world, the demiurge, shapes an unordered, unorganized material stuff by looking at a perfect and eternal model. The craftsman transfers, as far as possible, what he sees in that model to the unorganized recipient that he wishes to make the best possible image of that model. That model is intelligible, perfect, beautiful, motionless, always identical. It exists eternally, and it exists eternally as it is. On the other hand, the image is sensible and therefore imperfect, not so beautiful, emotion, and always becoming, changing, being generated and perishing. The model is a living thing, or better, it is the living being. So its image is a living being too, with its body and a soul, the world soul. In a passage of the dialogue that is crucial for all subsequent discussions of time by Platonic philosophers, Timaeus tells us the following, and this is text 1. Now, when the Father who had begotten the universe observed it set in motion and alive, he was well pleased, and in his delight, he thought of making it more like its model still. So as the model was itself an everlasting living thing, he set himself to bring this universe to completion in such a way that it too would have that character to the extent that it was possible. Now, it was the living thing's nature to be eternal, but it wasn't possible to bestow eternity fully upon anything that is begotten. And so he began to think of making a moving image of eternity. At the same time, as he brought order to the universe, he created an eternal image of eternity that moves according to number, while eternity remains in unity. This is what we call time. This that we call time is the imagery of eternity. Now, the great scholar Rémy Braque has argued that this refers to the motion of the heavens and the stars in it. So time for Plato would be the ordered, countable motion of the visible heaven, which is an image of eternity, which is an image of the eternity of the motionless model after which the craftsman has shaped the sensible world. Rémy Braque, however, Rémy Braque did convince me that this is the meaning of this cryptic passage, but he seems to be alone in his interpretation of the text. Anyway, he does prove that no one before Plotinus in the 3rd century after Christ understood this passage as stating that time is an image of eternity. But what matters here is that the Neoplatonists after Plotinus, to whom we will return in a minute, took for granted that this is Plato's notion of time, namely that time is the moving image of eternity. So from this passage, we have to keep that there is a model image relation between eternity and time. And second, that eternity belongs to the realm of what really is, while time somehow relates to the realm of change, of what changes. And third, that time is a gift of the craftsman to the sensible world, to bring it to completion, so that the sensible world might be more similar to its model. The second step in our story, is, of course, Aristotle. with whom I believe scientists are more familiar. The concept of time, as a measure or number of change, as Aristotle develops in the fourth book of his Physics, is one of the cornerstones of modern theories of time, no doubt. But although he formulates a positive and consistent definition of time, Aristotle also raised doubts regarding the reality of time that haunted later philosophers. Let's begin with his definition, and this is text 2a. Hence, time is not movement, but only movement insofar as it has a number. Time, then, is a kind of number. Number is used in two ways, both of what is counted or countable, and also of that with which we count. Time, then, is what is counted, not that with which we count. These are different kinds of things. It's clear then that time is the number of movement with respect to the before and after. So what Aristotle is saying is that time is not what measures motion, but rather motion as measured. Time is actually any given motion that we employ to measure other motions. It is a comparison between motions, so to speak. This is exactly how any clock works, a regular motion used to measure other motions. And we get this measure by marking two arbitrary points in motion, a before and an after. This marking of motion is made according to the now, which is how Aristotle called the instant, which also will play an important role in theories of intelligible time, but in a spurious way. The now, or the instant, is something indivisible, extensionless, and it is what divides the before and the after, the past and the future. It is formally always the same, that is, it works always the same way, in dividing the before and the after, in being indivisible and extensionless. But it's always different also, because each instant will refer to a different point of change or time. We will return to the now in a while. A further important remark in Aristotle's discussion of time that we have to have in mind is that Aristotle seems to conclude that time is not real. Let us read two more brief passages, and these are texts 2b and 2c. The following considerations would make one suspect that time either does not exist at all or exists barely and in an obscure way. One part of it, the past, has been and is not anymore, while the other, the future, is going to be and is not yet. Yet time is made of these parts. One would naturally suppose that what is made of things which do not exist could have no share in reality. And if there cannot be someone to count, there cannot be anything that can be counted either. So that evidently there cannot be number. For number is either what has been or what can be counted. But nothing but so, or in so reason, is qualified to count. It is impossible for there to be time unless there is so, but only that of which time is an attribute, that is, of movement, can exist without so. The parts of time, which are past and future, for remember, the now is only the indivisible and extensionless limit between past and future, do not exist. So that time seems to be inexistent too, or rather, if not inexistent at all, time is at least as real as, say, the number 5 or any number. For numbers do not exist by themselves as senses for Aristotle, but are mental constructs and require someone to count things that exist in the full sense of the word. Sorry. None of the Neoplatonic philosophers seems to really understand Aristotle's definition of time. And they use Aristotle's concept, especially measure and indivisible now, in different ways, as we shall see in a moment. However, Aristotle offers them a challenge, the challenge of safeguarding time's reality. And one way of doing this, for a Platonic mind at least, is to state that time itself does not belong to the sensible realm, the realm of change, the realm of corruption. The third step of our story is Plotinus in the 3rd century. Plotinus is regarded as the founder of Neoplatonism, and although later Neoplatonists are not always in agreement with him, they nonetheless share with him much of their philosophical assumptions. Regarding the concept of intelligible time, whose emergence we are tracking, Plotinus' discussion of time and eternity is decisive for 3 reasons. First, Plotinus seems to be the first ancient thinker to understand that for Plato, time is the moving image of eternity. The first text in the handout, and this is how all thinkers after him understood Plato's text. In fact, Plotinus' treatise on eternity and time is a highly original meditation on that passage of the Timaeus. Second, Plotinus formulates with clarity a concept of non-temporal eternity, different from perpetual duration, that is essential to all philosophers after him. And third, he is the first thinker that does not conceive time in relation to sensible change. For him, time is the life of the soul, just as eternity is the life of the intelligible realm. Aristotle's definition serves only to be refuted. Time is not a measure at all. Plotinus thinks that we would not even be able to understand priority, posteriority, and simultaneity if we did not somehow possess an interior and previous awareness of time. The following passage, and this is passage 3, illustrates this well. Would it then make any sense to say that time is the life of the soul in its changing motion from one way of living to another? For if eternity is life at rest, identity and sameness, and already infinite, and time must be an image of eternity, just as this sensible universe is related to that intelligible one, then instead of the life above, we must say equivocally, in a way, that there is another life, that of this power of the soul. And instead of intellectual motion, there is the motion of a part of the soul. And instead of identity, sameness, and remaining in itself, there is not remaining in itself, but exercising different things. Instead of an extended and unity, the image of unity, the unity found in continuity. Instead of being already infinite, there is the progression to infinity leading to continuous succession. And instead of the whole being gathered together, the whole which is and forever will be, going to exist part by part. Time, thus, for Plotinus, is the life of the soul. That is the kind of, the way soul is the kind of thinking that is proper to soul, which is an intermediary between the intelligible and the sensible realms. The soul is not capable of thinking the whole of the intelligible reality at once, but only part by part. Yet, this kind of thinking is not in time, it is time. The changes that occur in the realm of sensible realm are in time because they are in soul and because of soul. Which soul is this? Well, it's not unanimous. Most interpreters take it to be the world soul, the one I mentioned before when speaking about Plato. I don't really agree with this, and I take it to be all souls, both the world soul and individual souls, like our souls. But that's enough about Plotinus, since discussing this would lead us away from our main subject. In sum, it's important to keep that Plotinus locates time in the soul as its life and refuses to see it as a function of change. Time is real, therefore, because soul is real and it will never fail. Now we are able, and I'm finished, don't worry. Now we are able to see how intelligible time emerges in the history of ideas and what such a time is, first for Iamblichus and then for Proclus. Well, Iamblichus' theory of time, Iamblichus' doctrine of time, as we have for Iamblichus' doctrine of time, we have to rely on fragmentary quotations and paraphrases of his lost works by Proclus and Simplicius. Iamblichus' point of departure is the interpretation of an unknown Neo-Pythagorean philosopher called Archytas, or rather pseudo-Archytas, probably from the 1st century after Christ. Archytas observes that time is unreal. And each of the nows, each of the instance, the nows, that divides time's unreal parts, that is past and future, is indivisible and transient, being the same in form, but different in the flux of change. This is basically what Aristotle had said, as we saw. But Iamblichus is a Platonic and also a Neo-Pythagorean thinker, and he wants to save time's reality. So Iamblichus, after quoting the pseudo-Archytas, interprets him in the same model image framework that permeates the Platonic tradition. For Iamblichus, Archytas' statements, that is the indivisibility of the now and the unreality of time, actually refer to two different kinds of time, on two different levels of reality. One is superior, indivisible. One is a superior, intelligible time, while the other is an inferior, sensible one. The indivisibility of the now is a property of the intelligible time, which is, like all essences that exist by themselves, indivisible, at rest, self-identical. Time is real. On the other hand, the unreality of time is a property of time in the sensible world. And it's nothing but the constant change of sensible things that are always becoming and never really are in the full sense of the word for a Platonist. So the always changing now, we identify in changes of the physical world is different from the real now that is transcendent and at rest. The flux is actually the becoming of the sensible world, which is an image of the intelligible one, which is at rest. And the now in the sensible changes, the now, the instant in the sensible changes, is a glimpse of the now that really is. That is, the flux of the sensible is its way of making intelligible reality manifest, of receiving reality. The changing now, the changing instant, is the only moment when the things of becoming are in contact with reality. This intelligible time is also a measure and a number, but not in the sense Aristotle understood these concepts. It is a measure and a number in the sense that it gives order to the sensible flux, that it prevents its dispersion. It brings things to perfection, keep them together, preserve their unity. The order of the intelligible time, the order that the intelligible time essentially is in a unified way, unfolds itself as the order of the sensible flux. Like other sense essences, the intelligible time is independent and above souls. It's not the life of the soul manifested in the sensible as it was for Plotinus. The world soul, however, it is still responsible for intermediating the sensible and the intelligible. The sensible flux, does not participate directly in the intelligible time from which it receives its order, but it's rather soul's role to do that. In the extant fragments of Iamblichus, he does not discuss eternity, but we can infer that eternity stands in relation to eternal beings, just as intelligible time stands in relation to temporal things. Eternity must be an essence, superior to other essences, that makes eternal beings eternal. At least this is what we will find in Proclus. Let's read a couple of passages of Iamblichus to illustrate some of these things I just said, and I'm almost finishing. These are texts for A and for B. For A and for B. So Iamblichus, as quoted, says, and where one has to conceive the flux and the onward movement of time in the things that participate in time. For these things are always becoming and cannot receive the static essence of time without being in motion. And as at any different moment, a different part of them touches this essence. Their affection is falsely attributed to time. The becoming now is an inherent attribute of those things that always participate in the intelligible now, but the identity corresponding to the continuous unity of those things which are at any different moment are in different states is a property of the indivisible now and is communicated from it to those things that are generated and are always different different moments. We coordinate the essence of time that exists effectively with the order of the cosmos, which is in a state of procession, which is coordinated with reference to the created things and which is not separated from these things that are completed by the essence of time. That simultaneously this order produces the heaven is made clear by the fact that reality of time is likewise coordinated with the ordering which proceeds from the maker of the universe. For clearly this reality precedes the revolution of the heaven. I'm finishing. And several other passages could be quoted. So in sum, from Iamblichus on, we find an intelligible time, an essence of time that is not in flux, that is not in motion, but is always an existing self-identical now. This time gives order to the sensible flux of the physical world by the intermediation of a word soul, which is different from and inferior to that essence. Last but not least, Proclus. Proclus wrote a voluminous commentary on Plato's time use, and his detailed interpretation of the first passage I quoted of Plato is hard to summarize. However, it's not fair to say that Proclus does not add much to Iamblichus' theory of time, but systematizes it. Proclus does make clear that Aristotle's subordination of time to physical motion is unacceptable, as a red was for Plato and Iamblichus. But he also makes clear that Plotinus' subordination of time to soul is equally unacceptable, as we would expect from Iamblichus, but we don't find in his extant fragments. Proclus emphasizes that time is in essence an unity that through the word soul brings sensible things to completion, and even calls time an intellect, a nous. So we can skip Proclus' passage. So I would like to apologize for this panoramic exposition. I thought that telling the simplified history of the concept of time from Plato to Iamblichus and Proclus would be more useful than dealing only with the concept of intelligible time, which is hard to develop without entering the intricacies of the metaphysical systems of the Neoplatonists, and which might not be of interest of scientists. I hope I was able to fulfill this text, which I was invited for. That is to expose the concept of intelligible time to non-specialists in ancient philosophy without excessive use of Neoplatonic jargon. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking too long.